All righty, we'll kick it off.
Okay, so I guess we're really official now. Welcome to this meeting of the San Diego Community Powers Community Advisory Committee. My name is Eddie Price. I'm the chair. I can't seem to find the agenda, but
Hey, Eddie, if you have,
I got it.
okay.
I think, yeah, this is it. No, this is not it.
So if you have the PowerPoint screen in front of you, where it says regular meeting agenda.
Right, okay.
I should be showing, but you guys let me know. I should be showing the agenda.
Yeah.
I see it.
Okay, perfect.
Welcome. Sebastian, you take the roll call, please, sir.
Yes. Let's see here. Carolyn Schofield.
Present.
Matthew Vasilakis.
Present.
Gary Johns.
Present.
David Harris.
Present.
Jen Dirks.
Present.
Tom Summers.
Present.
Secretary Webb.
Present.
Vice Chair Hammond.
Present.
And Chair Price.
Yes, sir.
All right, we have 9 members present. As mentioned earlier, Ed Lopez from Chula Vista, he's absent today, but he is celebrating his wedding anniversary. So we're glad for him to be spending time with family.
Okay, so Sebastian, you're going to run the election?
Nick actually will. So just to kick it off, we have fiscal year terms for officer elections. And so since we didn't have a meeting in July, we're having the elections today, and they will run until June 31st of next year. One other, and Nick will handle that portion with all the structure, etc. And he'll dive into detail on how it'll go. One thing I do want to let you all know is that we realized, and want to give credit to Secretary Webb, who pointed this out, that right now the general terms of your seats as general members end in May of 2022 and 2023. So next year, we will be undergoing that process. So since we have that May cutoff, and if any of you become officers, there could be that, May to July gap where we don't have an officer. And so we want to avoid that. What we're going to end up doing is recommending to the board that your terms match the fiscal year. So that way it's nice and smooth, and we don't run into that potential issue. So anyways, just wanted to provide that quick background. And then, as you guys know, the officer positions are for secretary, for vice chair, and for chair. Secretary typically would play a more active role for in-person meetings, which would be putting together quick minutes for the chair and for quick reporting out to the board. That is the simple role. Then the vice chair would run the meeting in case the chair is not present. And then obviously the chair would be running the meeting, as you all are familiar. So I think that covers it. So I'll pass it over to Nick for.
Before you do that, Sebastian, can you tell us who has what terms and when we're, individually going to be termed out?
I don't remember. I'm happy to follow up after the meeting, reminding you all of all of that. And then we are thinking of how to go about that process with with your respective board members. But let me follow up with you because there's a lot of you guys and I honestly do not remember.
Okay. Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Sebastian. Nick Norvell from the SDCP General Counsel's Office. I wanted to talk about the procedures for the election of the chair, vice chair, and secretary. The policies and procedures for the CAC state that the officers will be nominated or self-nominated and elected every July. Again, we didn't have a July meeting, but we're holding it now in August by a simple majority vote of the CAC. There's not very detailed procedures in the CAC's procedure manual about exactly how an election happens. What Sebastian and I wanted to propose was a specific process by which the floor would be open for nominations or self-nominations. If a CAC member wanted to nominate another member, the nominated individual would be asked if they accept or decline the nomination. If they decline, the nominated person would not be considered nominated for the vote. And then to ensure that every CAC member has had an opportunity to make a nomination, whether that's of another person or themselves, we would ask if there are any further nominations before closing the floor and proceeding with a vote. And then staff would administer a roll call vote in which each CAC member would state the name of the candidate for whom they cast their vote. And a vote of the majority would be necessary to elect the position. So, and we would start with the chair and then move on using the same process to the vice chair and then move on with the secretary. The alternative to the process I just outlined is that someone would just make a motion to elect someone and then it would be an up or down vote on one individual. The weakness of that approach is that there is not the opportunity to hear multiple nominations from multiple people before proceeding to a vote. So it's ultimately up to the committee which procedure you'd like to use, whether it's the one that Sebastian and I put together or just making a motion. So I think the first thing for the committee to consider is which process you'd like to use.
I, for one, want to hear all the nominations and then to choose amongst them. I do not like the single nomination and up or down vote at all. I think it precludes the process. It becomes a race to make a nomination. That's my opinion.
Is that a motion? I second it if it is. Or I will make a motion that we adopt procedure number 1.
Do we need to make a motion, Nick? Or is that just preference?
I think it would be helpful to have a motion and do a quick vote just to make sure that it's on the record which procedure the committee is deciding to use. So I think that would be appropriate.
I second.
Okay.
Okay, this process has been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Afterwards, I'm curious, since it wasn't on the agenda as a voting item, I know we've had issues in the past with items not being on the agenda, so I would just like clarity on what is able to be voted on with a motion that's not on the agenda and what is, but unrelated specific to the topic.
It's still part of the election of chair, vice chair, and secretary. So it would still fall under this procedural motion would fall under that agenda item.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sebastian, could you take the roll for the motion?
Yeah, absolutely. Gary Johns.
Aye in favor.
Okay. Carolyn Schofield.
Aye in favor.
Matthew Vasilakis.
Aye.
Jen Dirks.
Aye.
David Harris.
Aye.
Tom Summers.
Aye.
Secretary Webb.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hammond.
Aye.
Chair Price.
Aye.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay, the floor will now be open for nominations or self-nominations for the position of chair.
This is Tom Summers here. I'd like to nominate Tara Hammond. I think she's done a wonderful job as vice chair, and she's my logical choice to be our chairman. Thank you.
Do I now respond, Nick?
Yes, if you can respond whether you accept the nomination or not, please.
I appreciate that, Tom, but would like to respectfully decline and nominate Eddie. I think he's been great at helping us center equity, and would like to give him the opportunity to continue moving that forward. But thank you, Tom. Eddie, do you accept?
Oh, yeah. Begrudgingly, but yes.
Don't
Yes.
even. You're
And
excited.
I appreciate the opportunity to serve not only San Diego Community Power, but, you know, represent communities of concern and communities in general at this level.
Are there any other nominations or self-nominations that the committee would like to make? Hearing none.
So exciting. This is so exciting.
All right, I'll take the roll call vote.
Thank you.
Gary Johns,
Yes,
Carolyn Schofield,
Aye.
Matthew Vasilakis,
Aye.
Jen Dirks,
Aye.
David Harris,
Begrudgingly, aye.
Tom Summers,
I vote aye as well. I didn't even consider that we would have second termers.
mhm. Secretary Webb,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hammond.
Aye.
And Eddie Price. Oh, okay, can you vote? Can they vote for themselves? Nick?
Yes.
Eddie Price.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes unanimously. Congrats on the second term, Chair Price.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I will now open the floor for nomination. Actually, Mr. Chair, if you want to run this portion, you're welcome to do
So the nomination for vice chair is now open. Would anybody care to nominate or self-nominate as the vice chair? Can I nominate also?
You may.
I'd like to nominate Tara Harmon as the vice chair. Because in the good cop, bad cop scenario, Tara's the bad cop. I happen to be the good cop, so I like that scenario.
I would be happy to do it, but if there's someone who wants it as well, who didn't have an opportunity to, I don't know if Nick, I'm allowed to say that or open that. I'm happy to do it again, but also would make space if others wanted it.
Any other nominations for the position of vice chair? I guess we can take the vote then, Sebastian.
Righty. Gary Johns,
yes, in favor of Tara.
thank you for the extra detail, Gary. Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Matthew Vasilakis,
Yes.
Jen Dirks,
Aye.
David Harris.
Yes, in favor of the bad cop.
Okay. Tom Summers,
Yes.
Secretary Webb,
Aye.
Tara Hammond,
Yes.
and Chair Price.
Yes, sir.
All right, congratulations. It passes unanimously. Man, so much excitement to serve San Diego Community Power, guys.
Yeah, we almost had to call the police on Gary Johns. He got so excited. Now the the position for secretary is open. So are there any nominations or self-nominations?
I would like like to nominate Anna Webb.
My only hesitation is that I'm one of the folks that's the term ends next May. So that would leave us for 2 months without a secretary. So,
Yeah, and right now that is an existing issue. But as I had mentioned, we will be recommending to the board that your terms be aligned with the end of our fiscal year, which is how the officer election terms are set. So just wanted to clarify that since you had brought up that issue.
okay, well then I accept the nomination. Thank you.
Eddie, in case you don't see, Jen has her hand raised.
Hello, Jen.
Thank you. I apologize for not putting it down because I was going to make the same nomination.
Okay, Sebastian, I believe you can take the vote now, Sebastian.
Okay. Gary Johns,
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Jen Dirks,
Yes.
Matthew Vasilakis,
Aye.
David Harris,
Aye.
Tom Summers,
Yes,
Anna Webb,
Yes,
Vice Chair Hammond,
Yes.
and Chair Price.
Yes.
Congratulations, Anna. Your term has been extended.
Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty.
It's been a very interesting first year, and I believe the second year is going to be even more interesting.
Yes, gonna be busy.
Do we have public comments that are not on the agenda? Is there any public comments, Sebastian?
Let me check the written comments. Last time I checked, there were none. Yep. And then just gonna remind folks in the attendee section, feel free to raise your hand if you have a public comment for items not on the agenda, and I can go ahead and unmute you. All right, I don't see any, Chair Price.
Okay, I'm trying to like triple task here. So now I believe it's the are there any items to be withdrawn or reordered on the agenda? Tara?
Chair Price, if I can hop in. So the previous item, it seems new to our agenda. This is, I would just like to, I guess, continue conversations we've had in the past about the CAC making a recommendation to the board to come out supporting rooftop solar and equitable access via NEM 3. And so this is something I'd recommend we take a vote on next month. Is this the appropriate place to do that?
I'm not quite sure. I think we have legal counsel on here. They can kind of guide the proper position.
It could be considered a non-agenda public comment. There's also the agenda item for, I'm sorry, pulling up the agenda here. The committee member announcements in section 9, those don't allow for discussion or action, but the committee member can make comments. And then there's also a standing item for discussion of potential agenda items for board of directors meetings.
Okay, I'll keep it here. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so do we give it over to, I got too much stuff open right now. Are we ready for the city presentation? Is that what's next on the agenda?
Yes, but technically we have another items that we would draw in the reorder on the agenda. I'm not sure if you mentioned that already.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I thought that's what Tara was referring to.
Okay, then yes. I will introduce this item. This comes on the heels of the recommendation from our very own Carolyn Schofield She and I had been discussing the recent climate equity index from the city of Chula Vista that was adopted just recently, and Carolyn will know better, but we thought that it would be good. And sorry, hey, Eddie, we can, there you go, much better.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Yeah, so we wanted to invite Roberto Torres. He'll give a chance to introduce himself, since the city of San Diego had done the first climate equity index, therefore what he's here today. And then next month, we'll be bringing Corey Downs from the city of Chula Vista to give a brief presentation on the Chula Vista Climate Equity Index. And the reason behind this presentation is for you all to be aware of the nuances between both indices and their approaches to them and their identification of communities of concern. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Roberto, and let me stop sharing my screen. And Roberto, if you have the presentation, feel free to share, or I can pull it up as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can go ahead and share my screen. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. Hopefully you guys can see that now. But yeah, good afternoon. I am Roberto Carlos Torres. I'm the climate equity specialist in the city of San Diego, and was leading the development of the climate equity index along with Sebastian when he worked for the city. He helped us out really developing this. So thank you all for having me, and I'm happy to share with you all the work that we did in developing the climate equity index. So diving right in. Yep, let me move that forward, sorry. So just an overview of what I'll be talking about today. Before I dive into the Climate Equity Index, wanted to take a step back and kind of talk a little bit about equity and equality and kind of the differences, then provide a background and objectives in our Climate Equity Index and how we went on to develop it, what the methodology was that went into it, and then dive a little bit deeper into our communities of concern for the city of San Diego, as well as how we are implementing climate equity in the city as a result of the Climate Equity Index. So the first thing I want to talk about, though, is the difference between equality and equity, as sometimes those two concepts can be confused or intertwined. When we are looking at things equally, essentially what we are thinking of is providing a service in the same way, regardless of who is using that service, right? So this illustration that you see here on equality shows you that every user gets a bike, but that the bike is not does not change for someone who is in a wheelchair to a small child, right? They all get the same bike, and that tends to be a good illustration for looking at things from an equality perspective. Equity, the nuance to it is that it tries to give everyone access to the same thing, but it does so by taking into account the user case, right? So if the city had a goal of providing all City of San Diego residents with a bike, doing so equitably would mean providing a bike that could be pedaled with your hands if it's someone that uses a wheelchair, or just simply providing a bike for the appropriate size of the user, right? A bigger bike for someone who's taller, and obviously a smaller bike for a child. In essence, when we're talking about equality and equity, those are really the big differences to be considering. Equality can be considered the end goal of equity, but the way to do that is by, when you're implementing things in an equitable manner, you're changing how you get to that equal point by being responsive to the community's needs. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into that. But understanding that kind of difference in foundation kind of shares with you our definition for climate equity. And so in the city, we've worked with several stakeholders. We have an equity stakeholder working group that works informally with the sustainability department. And working with our CBO partners there, we came up with this definition for climate equity to mean addressing historical inequities suffered by people of color, allowing everyone to fairly share the same benefits and burdens from climate solutions and attain full and equal access to opportunity, regardless of one's background and identity. So again, if you see there in the second part of this definition, it talks about equal access, right? Again, equality is kind of the end goal. But equity is talking about addressing those historical inequities that have been suffered by people of color to allow for those for full attainment, essentially. So sometimes we get asked, why is equity important? Well, as we've seen in case over case, disparities exist and they affect the health and safety of our communities of concern. We know that if we don't address these disparities, they'll continue and they'll leave hundreds of thousands of San Diegans vulnerable to those health risks and other concerns. And so focusing in our most vulnerable communities does help every community thrive. And that is why putting equity at the forefront of what we do is really important to ensure that we are taking care of our most vulnerable and that we are addressing, excuse me, addressing the historical disparities that cause barriers towards attaining equal access or equality. So how exactly do you advance equity? There isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a one answer fits all solution to how to advance equity. There needs to be a process put together that addresses the uniqueness and the user needs of each particular community. And so that's why we always talk about having a focus on community-driven engagement as well as empowerment, shifting the decision-making from one that is solely in the hands of government to being a more shared decision-making model is really important to be able to empower the communities who ultimately have to live with the decisions being made. It's also important to understand what the historical inequities and barriers are that are faced by our communities of concern. And then once we understand what those barriers are, being able to prioritize the resources in the areas with greatest need. So a lot of how we developed the Climate Equity Index was done so using that first bullet, really focusing on that community-driven engagement and empowerment. And then the tool itself allows us to understand what the historical inequities are and highlight the areas, communities of concern that need to be prioritized in our decisions, such as infrastructure investments and whatnot. So the objectives that we had in mind when we were developing the Climate Equity Index were to address social equity and environmental justice. Both of those concepts together are what we consider climate equity, and why you hear us using that term climate equity more so than, say, environmental justice or social equity. We also wanted to make sure that we had a citywide assessment of equity done. It was something that the city had not had before, and not many tools were available outside of kind of the closest was Callan Barrow screen to do that. And we really wanted to do something that was community-led and driven to do that assessment. And that was also our objective there. So to attain these objectives, we again established the Equity Stakeholder Working Group, which was comprised of 23 organizations who participated and helped us develop everything from what indicators were considered, what methodology was, to the data itself that we were utilizing. We did also work with the University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center, or EPIC for short. They helped us really identify what the best methodology would be, and then we're able to actually do the scoring. We gathered data, collected the relative scores, and we're able to produce a map to showcase the results that I'll show you a little bit later today. And then just as a note, originally we developed the Climate Equity Index in 2019. We have since revised the Climate Equity Index to incorporate a lot more of the stakeholder input that we received since then and align it a lot more closely to Cal Enviroscreen 3.0. Real quick, this slide here shows you all of the organizations that we brought together and worked with to develop the Climate Equity Index. And then here we dive a little bit into the methodology of how we ended up calculating the scores. We started with determining what indicators, what factors we were going to use to measure climate equity in the city of San Diego. We then collected the data, calculated the values for each indicator by census tract, and then we're able to standardize those indicators, averaging those standards, and then get finally the Climate Equity Index score. This is a Z-score analysis that we used, but more commonly you can think of it as we essentially took every census tract in the city of San Diego and graded them on a curve based off of the now 41 indicators that we have in the Climate Equity Index. And the indicators that we incorporated are all listed here, all 41 of them. The ones that you see highlighted in orange are new indicators that we utilized since the 2019 report. Those include, originally we had toxic release from facilities, cleanup sites, hazardous waste generators and facilities, as well as solid waste sites and facilities all as one indicator. But through some of our stakeholder engagement, it was determined better to split each of those apart. We also added air quality indicators such as ozone, PM 2.5, and diesel PM. And then we tweaked our cardiovascular disease indicator, all to align more closely with Cal Enviroscreen 3.0. And we can say that we utilize all 20 indicators that are used in Cal Enviroscreen. So once we did all the calculations and were able to take all 41 of these indicators, we split up each census tract into one of 5 categories, ranging from very low access to opportunity all the way to very high access. Here is where you'll see a little bit of a difference between the City of San Diego's Climate Equity Index and what Chula Vista ultimately ended up using. I think they only split it up into 4 categories and based it off of population percentages. So as a result of us splitting it into 5, what we found was that there were 206 tracts with high and very high access to opportunity. Pretty much a majority of the city really was experiencing high and very high access. We did find 88 census tracts with very low, low, and moderate access to opportunity. And those 3 categories of census tracts are what we consider communities of concern. And just to give you an idea, that covers roughly 30% of the city's population. Diving a little bit deeper into our communities of concern and what they look like. With tracts with very low access, we only have 3, and they are found in Barrio Logan and the Logan Heights community areas. Looking at census tracts with low access to opportunity, you find some of them scattered throughout, specifically in the Midway District, as well as City Heights and Peralta East census tract. Then you look at Grant Hill or Stockton area, Lincoln Park, Mountain View, Shelltown, South Crest, Sherman Heights. We do have a census tract up north in the San Pascual District 5, and then down in the San Isidro border region in Palm City, San Isidro, Otay Mesa, and the Tijuana River Valley / Nesters community. Now, when we look at census tracts with moderate access to opportunity, predominantly they're scattered in council districts 4, 8, and 9, but we do have some in other council districts. Council District 2, 6, and 7 have 1 census tract with moderate access to opportunity, while Council District 3 has 6 census tracts and Council District 5 has 5 census tracts, as you can see on the maps here. So while the Climate Equity Index did not use race or ethnicity as an indicator in the calculation, we still wanted to see what the demographic breakdown was of our population in relation to these categories. And what we found is that there was a disproportionate percent of people of color that are concentrated in our communities of concern. The graph here that you see shows you if everything was about equal, citywide, we would see a distribution of 54% of communities of color throughout each category. However, if we look at the 3 census tracts with very low access to opportunity, we actually see that 94% of residents are people of color in those census tracts. And disproportionately, again, if you look at census tracts with low access, that drops a little bit, but is still overrepresented at 83%. So this is kind of shows you that there is a racial disparity in the city as well. And so we wanted to put together some recommendations for how to implement climate equity in a way that kind of addresses this disparity, as well as the barriers and concerns that our communities face. And so with that, our first recommendation was to prioritize and invest in our communities of concern. You know, since then, we've partnered with Environmental Health Coalition to go after the Transformative Climate Communities Planning Grant from the state to bring in more state dollars into the Barrio Logan community. And we were pretty successful at doing that. And that planning is currently going underway. Our second recommendation was to do more engagement work and specifically partner with our CBOs to do that engagement in communities of concern. We know that historically residents from our communities of concern are not able to be as engaged in the decision-making process. And so needing to have a focus on getting more engagement in those communities is crucial. And we need to also be able to leverage the expertise of our community-based organizations in those communities to be able to do that. And so we've taken this approach with the Climate Action Plan update that we're currently going through to focus engagement in communities of concern. And we did that by working with both the Institute for Local Government, a local nonprofit, and then the several CBOs, I think it was 5 CBOs from the San Diego area that focused in the communities of Barrio Logan, Southeastern San Diego, City Heights, as well as Linda Vista. It was Linda Vista Eastern area, as well as the San Isidro border region. And I think I said it, but Barrio Logan as well. Our third recommendation was to explore the feasibility of an ambassador program, and we continue doing that. The Urban Sustainability Coalition has been real successful in developing a climate ambassadors program, and we're looking to see how the city can replicate and expand on that program. Our fourth recommendation is just a commitment to determine other mechanisms to integrate and utilize the Climate Equity Index in city policies. And so we've been pretty successful in incorporating that into our Complete Communities initiatives, as well as establishing a climate equity fund that it sets aside funds from the budget process to go and help infrastructure projects in communities of concern. As well as we are currently looking at changing up our CIP prioritization process to incorporate and give priority to our communities of concern. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. You can stop sharing.
Thank you, Roberto. That was a very comprehensive presentation.
Hey, Chair Price.
I really like the use of communities of concern. I don't know who came up with that catchy embracing phrase, but I really like that.
Thank you, Eddie. I wonder too.
Yeah. Must have been a genius of some sort. Were you going to say something, Gary?
No, it was me.
There are hands raised.
I don't see no hands raised, but okay.
David Harris, Tom Summers, and Matthew.
Okay. Let's go in that order.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the community engagement for the CAP update, City of San Diego is supposed to issue a draft in September or maybe October. And I wondered, how will you integrate the community input into the sort of measures and policies that will be in the CAP update? Does it really only have to do with how funding gets distributed under different programs, or will there be specific policies and measures to address the inequities?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And so we utilized the Climate Equity Index to identify our communities of concern, and that gave us kind of the areas to focus most of our engagement in. We still did kind of really broad engagement and took all of that information in. How we're incorporating it is we concluded our initial engagement, I want to say in June. And so since then, what we've been doing is collecting and seeing all the information that came in, and have started identifying actions that are kind of relating back to what we heard from the community engagement. Once the draft is released, one of the things that we'll be doing is identifying where the actions came from. So if it was something in response to communities' feedback, or if it, why else it was coming through. So once the draft of the update is released, we're hoping to be able to identify, this is what we heard from the community, and here are the proposed solutions we want. And then we'll kick off another phase of engagement, if you will, that will do some ground truthing and understanding, like, of the actions that we're identifying. Did we miss any? Or are there any that stand out as like number one priority for the communities, so that once the adoption of the CAP is completed, that all comes in full package too.
Thank you.
Next. Who's next?
I think that was me.
Okay.
Roberto Carlos, I think you did a good presentation there, and I got some of my answers already, but just curious about how, as we go into the process of developing and determining community needs, let me back up. Is this a document that you guys are going to live with the community, with the climate action plan of each community?
The Climate Equity Index?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a document that is kind of guiding our work in the city of San Diego, particularly when we're talking about prioritizing investment infrastructure into communities of concern. It also is how we were able to focus a lot of our engagement, our equitable engagement in communities of concern as well. So we really utilize the CEI as a way to identify areas for us to focus and prioritize in the city.
So that would be something that would, the other 4 communities, well, Chula Vista has already taken this step. The other 3 communities might want to follow these same protocols in regards to identifying community needs.
Yeah, it's definitely an approach that we highly encourage, right? And ensuring that, I didn't say this in the presentation, but I think the most innovative part of the Climate Equity Index was actually the community development of it versus the actual data. That was everything, we relied on census data. We were able to collect most of that. No small feat. Sebastian did a wonderful job getting all that information. But really the innovative part was that we essentially had a commitment to make our decisions on how to develop the Climate Equity Index in a consensus building environment that utilize the expertise of our community-based organizations to do so.
And I think, if I may, I was involved in this, it very rarely do you see municipalities actually humbling themselves to listen to the community and find out what's best for them. And so as these other cities come on, it's a mindset. There was a different mindset with the city of San Diego over the last few years to actually address inequitable situations, and not just to check a box, but to actually do something, right? And I believe they realized after getting cussed out by a couple of people a couple of times that, you know, in order to get the real deal, you have to allow the community to be the community and not put them into a box. And I think the city of San Diego did a real good job of that. And so, as to your point, as we attempt to roll this out to different cities, you know, there has to be some, you got to make sure the ground is fertile before you roll it out. You know what I mean? You have to change some mindsets prior to actually delivering it, so you get the best results with the city, like with the city of San Diego. And they're still working on it. They're still dancing with the community members. And I'd like to give a shout out to Roberto, because he's got to dance with people like me in the hood. And then he got to go down to City Hall and dance with the people at City Hall. And so, you know, if you got to do that in one day, that could be a very interesting way to spend your day. But he's done that. He's done a pretty good job. Sebastian was, you know, greatly involved in this, as was Cody Hoven. And so, you know, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Robert, Sebastian, and Cody Hoven, as well as our community partners like Matthew and Tara, who, you know, Tara, I found out I wasn't the bad cop, Tara was. That made me feel so much better. But yeah, that's, I'd just like to take a moment to do that. Gary Johns and then Matthew, is that how it's supposed to go?
No, Matthew first, then me.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'll second what Eddie said, and also just wanted to highlight how critical Roberto's work has been in centering equity at the city and kind of inspiring this in other jurisdictions, as we're seeing in Chula Vista. You know, I think we really need to press hard as a community advisory committee to ensure that SDCP replicates these types of practices, especially as we go about developing, hopefully a local community power plan to figure out where and how best to create local rooftop solar and storage and other distributed energy resources in our communities. And so, you know, anything that we can do, Roberto, to help you amplify this work at the city or, you know, within the communities that are part of SDCP, let us know. I think a lot of the important equity components are going to be critical, not only for the CAP update, but as we have conversations about building electrification, bringing on new cities into community SDCP. These are just going to be important frameworks for us to have. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the presentation today.
Thank you.
Okay, and maybe my turn. So one of the things in our work plan, as and Eddie, you know so well, is to develop our own equity index. And you know, I was kind of, I wondered how we'd go about doing this, and so this presentation really opened my eyes on how you can do it. And I was thinking, well, okay, so we've basically done the city of San Diego, which is the lion's share of customers that we're going to have in San Diego Community Power. But then we got the other 4 cities, and it'd be great if all 4 of them could essentially take the same framework with the same indicators and just so that it plugged in organically with what City of San Diego did. But I also heard, and I'm not sure, and I never knew anything about this before, is that Chula Vista has already undertaken something like this. And so my question is, or actually, it's a suggestion and a question. My suggestion is that all the other cities go through the same exercise, or I think San Diego Community Power itself should take the initiative to do this index development so it dovetails with that of the city of San Diego. And then the question is there a problem with Chula Vista?
Is that a question for me?
Well, since I don't know anything about if Chula Vista is really off on their own thing or not? Yes, I guess it is.
Uh,
That part of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's anything off with Chula Vista. In fact, I think an assessment like the Climate Equity Index, again, the real big crux of it is that there's enough community engagement and input in the development of what the indicators are and how the methodology is used, right? So, you know, it's tough to have kind of a regional assessment like that because each jurisdiction is so different and the demographic is so different, the needs are so different, that it would be better suited to do what like what Chula Vista did, of take the concept of the Climate Equity Index, really keep the values of that community driven and community led process, to then come up with a Climate Equity Index that has the definitions that the community itself wants, right? So I think the best bet is to encourage other municipalities, specifically your member jurisdictions, to try and develop something like the Climate Equity Index. But I am also cognizant that the big lift is that work around the community engagement piece, right? That's what took us over 6 months of work. But yeah.
And just so you know, there was work going on before they even hired Roberto. So it's a major lift, you know, and to my point about making the ground fertile so that when a person like Roberto gets here, even though it's still hard, it's doable, right? It's doable. One more thing, and then I think I'm gonna go to Secretary Webb because she almost jumped through the screen when somebody asked about Chula Vista's climate action plan and scared the shit out of me. You know, one thing that we may be able to do, and I think, you know, I've heard this in the conversation, is maybe San Diego Community Power, our community advisory committee, could actually help these other cities, suggest to these other cities, and be involved in these other cities as they develop their climate action plans and their climate energy plans and their climate. You know, we should be, as an entity, San Diego Community Power, we should be intimately involved. We should have got more involved with Chula Vista. And I think we may hear more about that from Secretary Webb. So Secretary Webb, I will give the floor to you.
Well, thank you. Actually, I think Carolyn had her hand up before me though. And
okay.
But I was, because I would like to hear what Carolyn has to say, but it just struck me during the presentation, Imperial Beach is right next to the Nestor community, which tags onto San Ysidro, and that underserved, that low, one of your areas that, you know, are in need. And when we, about 4 years ago, we redistricted, we were just one big happy city. And then we districted. So we separated our city into 4 different areas. And there's 4 of them. And we have a city council rep that lives in each of those areas. That way, all of our city council doesn't just live at the coast, you know, and the folks off 13th Street are underserved. So this has worked out quite well. Now, what I want to tie that to is that we do have a climate action plan. We were early on adopting that. And, but what struck me about the presentation was the equity part of it. When they districted the city of Imperial Beach, they did ensure that the maps of the districts they were creating had a very comparable number of people, comparable mean income, you know, amount, and that was total. So if one was less than another, they actually just grabbed a few blocks from over here, you know, and so to speak, on the map. But my thought is how interesting that what the work you've done, and I'm sure what Carolyn's going to speak to, could be incorporated with that as a different level of the equity component. And I think that's excellent. And I'd like to bring that up to our city council members and our mayor. And would like, at that point, I'm sure I could reach out and get some information.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Hi. I was just going to say, I was thinking about the whole idea of how other cities can be involved, or, if they can do a similar program without going through the same system. But talking about having a template so that we can compare more easily, the actual process of developing the indicators is really the most important part. It's bringing the stakeholders together and really having the community have access to the data from the place where they live. And so that's why the maps are different, and it's appropriate that they are, because the decisions that we have to make for each community are going to be different for that community, even related to San Diego Community Power. And but one thing I wanted to share is that when you look at and this actually, Sebastian, this came from a question that you asked me about how our equity index compared with CalEnviroScreen. And so I thought, well, I'll take a look at this. And so I looked at a couple different census tracts on CalEnviroScreen, and then I looked at it in our Climate Equity Index. And what you see differently, and I looked at pollution, because we have areas of really high pollution, and some of them are in unexpected places in our city. And under CalEnviroScreen, of course, you see the reasons for the pollution. But under the equity index, you see things like solar panels, EV chargers, trees, parks, bike lanes. And so as a community member, if you look at that and then you start looking around your community, you realize, oh, this is what we need, and this would help us. And so I just found it very, very powerful, just as a resident individually. But what I want to ask Roberto is about the county, and how does the county fit into the whole having some kind of data in order to drive choices? And is anyone working with the county on this issue? And who, because I know that we have a new equity office, so I'm really excited about that. But in order to really move forward, I think the county has to be able to address the exact same issues. So thank you.
Yeah, I always get asked some variation of how this could look for the entire county. It is, I think the county has a role to play, of course, in identifying kind of the areas of need. But they're kind of in a tricky situation where, the CEI is a tool best used by a jurisdiction, like City of San Diego, City of Chula Vista, Encinitas, and so on and so forth, right? Because again, each population is different, even though we're all in the county of San Diego. There are different needs kind of throughout, right? So it's difficult to have a tool like the Climate Equity Index be applied to such a huge geographic area like the county. A better approach would definitely be that the individual jurisdictions kind of do that, and then the county could apply a similar approach for the unincorporated areas, right? Alternatively, too, is that option of using CalEnviroScreen. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Carolyn, of the difference between CalEnviroScreen and something like the Climate Equity Index is that we added to that looking at climate change indicators as well, right? Access to bike lanes and pedestrian infrastructure. Things that, CalEnviroScreen is really built to look at the environmental health hazard areas and compound the risk to vulnerable populations. Like that's what Cal EnviroScreen does. We add to that the climate change indicators, such as prevalence to PV solar in homes and things like that, to better understand, as we're guiding our climate action plans and whatnot, what are the areas that we need to focus on where EV infrastructure is lacking, or where pedestrian access is not very high, right? So that's just a really tough thing to do countywide. And so it's better to have just the individual jurisdictions be able to engage their residents and figure out kind of what the best is for them. And it also makes the case, of why we did it, such as we're grading census tracts on a curve, right? It's all relative to each other. One of the other kind of pitfalls of Cal EnviroScreen is that it's looking at all of California, and never mind that it's ignoring kind of the impacts of climate change and looking at those indicators. It's also judging everyone across the state, and what has happened is it's essentially saying that the air quality in Fresno is way worse off than it is in San Isidro. However, we, knowing on the ground, understand that internationality and just the traffic, and I mean, San Isidro is the most trafficked port of entry in the country. The air quality there, because if you look at PM 2.5 and diesel particulate matter, is probably worse off than in Fresno. But if you average everything out across the state, sure, maybe things are pretty bad up there. So I think it's a long tangent for me to say that tools like the Climate Equity Index are best used on a more citywide, localized perspective than they are with big regions like the county, like the entire county.
And I think, if I may add, and I don't see any more hands up, if I may add, I think it would be very interesting and appropriate if San Diego Community Power would be involved in all these climate action plans that are going on throughout our member cities and other cities in the county, to provide some sort of continuity between all these different programs, right? Because San Diego may come up with something and Imperial Beach comes up with something totally different, and it's going to be hard to there's not a string that goes through everything, and unbiasedly, right? And so, as I look at ways to empower our community advisory committee, it may be a way to help do that, so that we become more involved in our relative community action plan, climate action plans. That's just something it was an epiphany I just had just now. But I'm always looking for ways to increase our value to San Diego Community Power and the communities that we represent. And so we need to be in some of these conversations.
If I can chime in on that real quick, and then I see Tom and Gary have their hands up. On a personal level, I think more collaboration is better to align the goals of the region. However, an excuse for the very loud noise. Don't know what's going on in the alleyway. Anyways, SCCP is, as we all know, just in this for the electricity generation and on that component. I think where there is potential to collaborate with member jurisdictions on that, I think there could be an opportunity. Since the climate equity indices dive into a variety of topics that are outside of SCCP's umbrella, sidewalks, traffic lights, etc., then I know that right now, and don't want to put Matt on the spot, but Climate Action Campaign and Hammond Climate Solutions are working on establishing or passing a law, and you guys can chime in because you guys are more in the weeds on this than I am, a regional climate collaborative that can align all the actions of the different member jurisdictions. So it can kind of create that strength that you mentioned about, Eddie. So just wanted to provide a quick comment on that.
Gary, or I don't know which one of y'all had your hands up first, Gary or Tom?
Tom did.
Yeah, so I'm really curious about a lot of these metrics, and I really commend Roberto and your staff. I'm assuming you had some people and some resources to collect all of this stuff. Are some of these, like for instance, you had 41 for San Diego, 41, let's call them metrics. Chula Vista had a different number. So for those of us that might be trying to determine some of this data, is your information going to be accessible, Roberto?
Yeah, the city's information is available online, sandiego.gov/climate equity.
Can you throw that link into the chat, Roberto?
Yeah, I can do that. And in there's links to download all of the data. You can download it as an Excel file. You can download it as a shape file to throw into ArcGIS if you're familiar with that. So we definitely have everything made publicly available so that not only is it just accessible to read, but also can be replicated for any jurisdiction that wants to take a look. And, I'll also just make the note, it really was just me, Sebastian, and one person from Epic who really pulled all this together. And quite honestly, it was mostly Sebastian. So it was a small but mighty team that was able to work on this. And at one point, Sebastian was like part-time. So that gives you insight into
cool.
how this was.
And then I'll share the Roberto's PowerPoint afterwards, as well as the links. We don't have the chat function enabled.
Just one last point there, Roberto, and thank you for that. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna pass that question. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm up. So I'm trying to bring this back to us and what we're doing as far as equity. And we had some serious discussion of this in preparing the work plan, which I think in an ideal world, this work plan might have been brought before the whole committee in this meeting, and hopefully will the next. But I'm just going to flag a couple of things that are supposedly in our hopefully work plan for this next year. This is under the category of we're going to work with the staff and board initiated items. We're going to work with the SDCP board to be involved in hiring an equity officer and also be involved in, when they're coming on board. And also this was a point that Eddie raised. We were going to develop an equity equation. And I know this isn't exactly the same thing, but I'm just trying to draw the connection here, since I had forgotten about what was in the work plan in our month off and everything like that.
Hey Gary, can I pause you right there? We did take a little bit more time reviewing the draft. So just want to clarify that nothing has been finalized yet, and we will be discussing it more with you all.
Sure.
And since items for the ad hoc are not subject to the Brown Act, then let's keep those conversations that way, and then we can follow up after. That's okay.
Well, maybe we should just advertise that we've got some ideas for addressing issues like this in the future.
Thank you for your enthusiasm, Gary. Alrighty, so I just wanted to wrap this all up. Why did we have Roberto attend? Obviously, the city of San Diego is a big chunk of the region, and we thought it was valuable for you all to be aware of the mechanics and what was going on. Also, as I had mentioned, we're going to be having Corey Downs present next month, and it's all behind the efforts of SCCP as an agency, wherever it has the flexibility. It will utilize these maps for a variety of purposes that are yet to be defined, but that is the intent of the agency, is to utilize these maps that have been created by the member agencies, San Diego and Chula Vista in this case. And then where there is no CEI, then the default will be Convirus Green. So for the other 3 cities, unless those cities choose to develop a CEI of themselves. So, it's good to see that the CEI is being, elevated and utilized by other agencies such as us. So just wanted to wrap it all together for your awareness.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the stuff that you've done, Sebastian.
Thank you guys for always being in the trenches.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let me reshare my screen. Okay. Chair Vice, just wanted to give you a friendly reminder to entertain any public comments in case there are any.
Are there any public comments on anything that we've discussed thus far?
You give the public a few seconds to raise their hands if they want to. And I don't see any, Chair Vice.
Okay, so apparently we're on item number 7.
Yes.
Are you going to lead this discussion?
Yeah. I'll kick this off, and then I'll allow our legal counsel Nick Norvell to chime in or correct me if I get anything wrong. So the governor had signed. Actually, Nick, why don't you take this one?
Sure, I'm happy to. So as you all know, part of the reason that meetings have been able to take place relatively easy through video conferencing and teleconferencing over the last year is that the governor suspended certain provisions of the Brown Act last year as part of the initial response to the COVID-19 crisis. And those suspensions of provisions of the Brown Act have remained in place through now. Under one of the governor's most recent executive orders, the Brown Act provisions, the suspension of certain Brown Act provisions will expire at the end of September. So at that time, for the most part, meetings will need to go back to being in person. The Brown Act normally contains provisions that allow teleconferencing and video conferencing, but there are specific requirements that have to be met in order to do it. Number one, a majority of the members have to participate from within the jurisdiction physically. Number two, the location of each of the members who's teleconferencing in has to be listed on the agenda. A copy of the agenda has to be posted at that location, and the public has to be able to participate from that location. So generally, because most people don't want their home addresses published on a public agenda, it's pretty rare that anyone ever uses those Brown Act provisions to participate from their own home. Generally, most commonly, it's used when someone is sometimes on vacation, but maybe attending a conference or something like that, and there's a fixed location from which they can post an agenda. They're comfortable posting the address and the location and having a member of the public there if they show up. So I do want to just preface, there is the potential for some teleconferencing, but there are specific requirements that have to be met, and there has to be a long lead time for staff to be able to comply with those requirements. So for the most part, what we anticipate is that the CAC will go back or go to, for the first time, in-person meetings. I do also want to clarify that agencies are making decisions about whether and to what extent they are going to continue to broadcast meetings to either allow the public to watch meetings live or to be able to participate live. I don't know that STCP has made a formal decision on that yet, but I suspect whatever that decision is would also apply to the CAC, and we'll work with staff on that. But that is a decision that agencies are also making, is whether and to what extent the larger public participation through teleconferencing will continue. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the legal side, and I'll turn it back to Sebastian if you want to talk about more logistics and locations for in-person meetings.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So obviously we are looking at some various options throughout the 5-member jurisdictions to host us starting in October. Wherever we can and wherever it's feasible, we will provide a live recording function for anyone who doesn't want to attend in person. However, there are limitations that we've experienced before. Some city councils may not have that function, or any reason of the above. So we're putting a good faith effort in pursuing that, but acknowledging that it may not be possible. I wanted to have this discussion with you all here. And then what I will be doing is following up with you all early next week to get your meeting preferences. Obviously, Fridays, bless you, Matt, Fridays at 1 p.m. works for some people virtually, but may not work for others, especially with a commute time involved. So I want to make sure that I have a good amount of options to work with and consider for everybody. We will try to accommodate a central location, but again, given the restrictions that some city councils have in terms of scheduling, we're gonna do our best. So I think that would cover it for now, but again, wanted to have an open conversation with you all, see if there are any questions or comments. And then also we are tracking, I think it would be fair to say, Nick, that with the Delta variant happening, there could be a change in the direction from the governor's office, and obviously we will keep you all updated, but so far that has not happened. So we're moving forward as described by Nick. But obviously if something happens, we'll keep you all updated.
Thank you. Any questions or comments or concerns? Okay, next item, agenda item.
And it'll be our first meeting, which is nuts, over a year end. Okay.
Uh-oh.
Can't wait.
Discussion of potential agenda items for board of directors meetings. Does anybody have anything we should discuss with the board or put on their agenda? I know Tara has something that we need to put on there. We need to formalize that and so I can deliver it.
I think you're referencing the NEM 3 letter, but I think it would also be interesting to hear an update. Bill Carnahan had signed a 1-year agreement, I believe, or it's through October. And so it'd be curious for us to get an update and also hear, which we could either get, I'd recommend we get an update at the CAC, but also have it on a future board of directors meeting. So the community's hearing what the plans are for hiring a replacement.
That makes sense.
You noted.
Sebastian, do you have any information on that item?
I do not, Chair. But I will relay this message to the executive team and have them provide an update for you all.
And from my understanding, or what I heard, is that there's somebody in our finance department that we hired from the finance department of the CCA that went broke.
No, our chief financial officer is Eric Washington.
Yeah, but there's somebody that came, from what I heard, not our CFO, but somebody that's in that department. And I was just concerned when I heard it, that's all. I'll do some more investigation is what I'll do.
Sounds good, and I'll talk to the executive team on this update.
Okay, anything else? Anybody on here?
If I may get a little bit more information from Tara on the NEM item, just want to make sure I have a full understanding.
I'll defer to Eddie since I had spoken to him about this item and he had suggested a discussion today and a vote in the CAC at our next meeting. And so that's why I brought it up in the item 4, I believe, on the agenda, and it wasn't a specific recommendation for the next meeting since we haven't voted ourselves.
Okay, yeah, we could talk more about it between now and the next meeting, just to give us enough time to put it on the agenda and any materials that may go with it.
And I think if staff or Tara or myself could, when we have a situation like this where we're going to talk about something at the next meeting, I think it would behoove the situation if we send out information, because everybody may not be up to speed about the NEM proceedings and where it currently sits. And I think that would be, if that is possible, I think that would be a intelligent thing to do.
I would just mention, obviously, as individuals, you all can share information as much as possible. If you're sharing information for the purpose of voting on it as CAC representatives, just a friendly reminder to blind carbon copy everybody if you're emailing that information, just so there's not a zero meeting that's created. And Nick can chime in on that. Just wanted to
chime in because he put his camera on. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Mr. Chair. I would just actually caution against that members should not blind carbon copy the entire rest of the committee, because even communication from one to the rest of the committee could be considered part of basically discussing an item offline. But if there is information that staff is given to staff and staff decides to bring forward on behalf of itself, that can be communicated. And I can talk to Sebastian, you and I can talk later about communicating to the committee while maintaining Brown Act compliance.
So my first suggestion is kind of what you're saying. When I asked Sebastian, could he send out information, like we send information to him or whoever, and then he sends it out to the rest of the committee? That's okay? That's
okay, correct. It can be communication from staff to the committee as long as there's not discussion offline. But we'll talk to him about, Sebastian, about how to do it in a way that doesn't clearly communicate that it's coming from a particular member or something along those lines. But I think the concern is a timing issue for staff and making sure that staff has the resources they need to provide the information to everyone. But I can talk to Sebastian more.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Great.
So I'm assuming we're done with this if nobody else has any potential items.
Excuse me, Chair. Seems like Gary got bumped to the attendee section. Let me promote him.
I can't see these hands.
That's why I'm here. No worries. Hey, Gary.
Hi, yeah, I dropped out for a while. I'll catch up with you on the part about meetings in person. I missed the last half of that, but I'm back. Thank you.
Okay, and then as you know, we record these, so this should be posted up by early next week.
Yeah, that won't be a problem.
Okay, awesome. All righty, back over to you, Chair.
So the next item is number 9, correct? Can you put that on the screen? Because somehow my agenda has disappeared in all my tabs. I know you guys never have those problems where something just disappears in the tabs. I didn't know tabs would eat things. Council member announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? What's going on in your city? Is anything, beautiful? Are there any issues?
Okay.
So this is Gary. My screen is acting kind of funny too, Eddie. I'm sympathizing with you. But I just wanted to announce Encinitas is holding an EcoFest on September 26th.
Where at?
And we will be attending. It's in Cottonwood Creek Park, where Encinitas Boulevard and intersects with Vulcan Avenue, right before the train tracks.
Now I have a question for, can we send out stuff like that to each other? Events that are happening in our jurisdictions?
Yeah, because it's not committee business.
Okay.
Mhm.
So if you got a flyer, Gary, if you could send it to everybody, I think that would be kind of cool.
I'll send out the website link, and Sebastian can clarify this, but I understand that SDCP will have a table or a booth at EcoFest.
Yeah, that's correct. We will, it's part of our outreach efforts that are slowly starting to happen.
Any other events or anything?
David has his hand raised, and I have something after David.
Okay, David.
Yes, I wanted to ask the committee members if you would support having a presentation from the SDCP procurement manager. I think his name is Byron Vosberg. Is that right, Sebastian?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the purpose of having a presentation would be to better understand SDCP's strategy for procuring solar and other renewable energy and the process they go through to identify potential projects and then evaluate them and finally negotiate and contract with them. I feel like the committee would benefit because some of these projects that are proposed generate some concerns in the communities where they're located. And I think it's important to understand what the strategy of SDCP is and how we can support the organization in that regard.
That makes sense.
I love that idea, David. And I guess I have a question, if I can, at this time for Sebastian. I assumed that the CAC would be seeing projects before the board voted on. I believe one of the projects David might be referring to, the board did approve, but we had zero discussion at the community advisory committee. Can we, moving forward, start being informed about these projects and weighing in about the potential projects before the board votes on it?
Let me look back at the scope of work and see what delegation has been provided and provide you with an answer on that.
Okay, thank you.
David,
My quick update was just the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance. I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting is hosting a picnic tomorrow at Balboa Park. And then on August 19th, there's a National Green New Deal Day of Action calling on Congress to support an infrastructure bill that goes big on climate, jobs, and justice. There'll be a virtual Facebook live stream due to COVID on Thursday at 11 a.m. on the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance Facebook page if anyone's interested in joining.
David, did you have something else? Your hand is still up, sir.
Oh, no, that was it. I just wanted to make that request to have a presentation.
Yeah, I like that too. And I have something. EV Noir and the San Diego Urban Sustainability Coalition is having a EV electrical vehicle event August 21st. It's going to be out at Mission Bay Park. San Diego Community Power is a sponsor of this event. It's EV Noir, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's a national people of color electrical vehicle association. And they're pretty, they do a lot of advocacy in Washington, D.C. and, just to make sure that communities of concern are involved in this EV revolution, with the governor stating and the president stating what we're going to do by 2025 and 2035. These messages need to be embraced by communities of concern also, because we have the communities of concern have the ability for a successful rollout, but they also have the ability to mess up the rollout if we're not involved in these conversations. So I think it's inherent that we get involved. And I will send a flyer, I think, to Sebastian, and maybe he could send it out with some of this other stuff.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, they're trying to get that new Ford F-150 out there, which really excites me because I really like that Ford F-150. If they could just lower it just a little bit and put some bigger rims on it and limo tinted windows, they might have somebody to buy one. Is that about it, Sebastian?
I need to clarify a couple of dates.
Yes, ma'am.
The chair, it's Secretary Webb. Okay, the Vice Chair Hammond, that was this Thursday at 11 a.m. on the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance Facebook page.
Correct, the 19th.
Okay, thank you. And then also Chair Price, what was the date for this?
Saturday, August 21st.
August 21st. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, everybody. I believe this concludes our meeting. I see
Yes.
everybody smiling, so even if it's not time, I think everybody wants it to be time. And so with that, I will bid everybody adieu. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.